Hello, welcome to the November 15th weekly JupyterLab call. Oh wow, today we have 20 people on the call. That's exciting. If you haven't already, please sign in on the agenda, which is in the chat. And if you'd like to talk about something, please add an item in the agenda. The first person on the agenda today is Fred, but he says he's not sure if he can make it. Does anyone? I don't see him on the list. Does anyone want to? Oh, it's just a short announcement.
Yeah,
Just
I
sound
can
assessed.
I can read out what he wrote
Yeah,
because I understand
please
what
do.
he. Yeah, so for folks on the JupyterLab Council, we do a periodic membership check, and so you should have an email asking you to go to a GitHub issue and verify that you are a member where you say where we have you in the records. So today is the last day, midnight anywhere on Earth. That's
Thanks,
all.
Jason. Yeah. So if you don't know about this, please check your Google Groups if you're on the JupyterLab Council. Okay, cool. Next person on the agenda today is Tony. Go ahead.
I know people usually say I'm not going to speak for all of y'all, but I'm going to speak for all of y'all. We haven't seen enough demos this year, and they're like my favorite thing. It makes me really sad because we basically develop a skateboard, and we should see people do tricks with it. So I was wondering if I could run a holiday community call on December 13th that overlap with this meeting and the notebook meeting, because I don't have the energy or the desire to try and schedule it otherwise. And I'd really like some people to show up already. But I'm wondering if y'all might be willing to sacrifice a lab meeting so that we could have a community call and maybe do some of these things that we're talking about.
What's the date you're proposing?
December 13th.
Okay. We have a lot of people on the JupyterLab Council here. Just like, does anyone have an objection to dedicating that call for this purpose? Would we need to have more conversation, do you think? Can we take the temperature? Any thoughts?
Sorry, which day? I was looking at my calendar and I lost
December
track.
13.
December 13th. I think that would be good for me. It's one of the few times that like doesn't conflict with most major holidays. We'd be close to 4.1 release date, says Mike. Okay. It doesn't even need to be necessarily brand new stuff. It could just be stuff that people have been developing using Jupyter and haven't showed to the group. Because I agree, we haven't had demos. We used to be in the habit of doing a lot of demos, and people love demos.
Okay, so Mike does raise a good point. What if, what if it is half the meeting and the other half, if necessary, to do 4.1 release things, we do that. And we make it the first half so that there's no chance of it being cut off.
Okay, so what if we did the notebook meeting is a triage meeting for 4.1, and then the community call is at the lab meeting. So I have an hour for, I can't do a community call is 45 minutes isn't enough runway for a community call. It needs to be an hour.
So let's see, Jason W. I think this probably inconveniences you the hardest. Is the notebook time an okay time to have a triage call if there's necessary to have one for 4.1?
On the 13th?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not particularly inconvenient for me. I can do that.
Okay, other people who are likely to go, I know for Mike and me, it's probably slightly more convenient, but Yeah, so basically the proposal is that the JupyterLab call is half an hour long and half an hour earlier than normal on December 13th. Is that okay?
Cool. Yeah, that will work for me at least.
All right, can you please write an issue on the Team Compass and
Yep.
just like,
Yep.
let's consider it like there's no objections here, but just in case there's people maybe who didn't come. And, you know, I think soon after it's been up for a little while, we can say, okay, everyone had a chance to have their say, this is how we're doing it.
Cool. Thank you all so much for the consideration.
No problem. Coincidentally, I just signed up to host the 12:13 call, so I am committed to being online and available that day.
Thank you, Jason. This is a great opportunity to beseech the rest of you. Please sign off.
Yeah, I actually put
agreed.
that on the agenda that we have a Team Compass issue on JupyterLab to register to host the weekly meeting, which a few of us have done in the recent past, but so far for the rest of the year, we don't have anybody else besides myself on the 13th. I also, are we going to have a meeting on, so the, okay, so the 22nd is not on that, or we are not having a meeting next week?
I am not sure. I imagined we thought maybe enough people are not going to be here that it would be too small, but I don't know.
Okay. It's the day before Thanksgiving in the US, so a lot of US folks are going to be traveling on that day, including myself. Also, the 27th is shortly after Christmas and Boxing Day, and so I'm wondering whether we should have a meeting then or just delete that.
I think I just, yeah, copy it and paste it, so we can probably do that. And I'll be honest, next time I do that, I think I'm going to omit a column of default host because I'm not sure why I invented this burden for myself, but I don't think I need to continue doing that. Anyone else, I could write someone else's name, for example, or just omit the column.
I mean, we
So
could have a
that's what I'm doing.
rotation as well. We could just have a random number generator that picks people, but that's not going to make everyone happy either.
I think a good way of doing it is if actually it is the case that nobody feels like leading a discussion that day, we still have an agenda. We can still run through an agenda. Like that doesn't require special expertise. But you know, if someone is hosting it, I think it actually does add a little bit and is kind of good because they might occasionally say, hey, look, there's other stuff we need to talk about, those sorts of considerations. So it's nice. But I would like it maybe if we just didn't think that that was strictly necessary to conduct the call. But, you know, I have a vested interest in saying this, what with having been the default host for quite some time. This wasn't meant to be like, I don't know if you had this game growing up, but we had a game called Kill the Man with the Ball. And there's one ball and everyone's running. If you're holding the ball, you're being chased. And the object is to run for as long as you can and then get rid of the ball before they get you. I've been holding the ball for a while, you guys, and I'm, you know, pretty fast, but come on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think in Europe that's just called rugby, but yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Let's continue, please. So, Jason, why don't you go next, please?
Oh, sure. I know we've been talking about it, but just for the record, I deleted the November 22nd and the December 27th JupyterLab calls from the shared calendar. For other items that are on the list, or other meetings that are on the list, please sign yourself up to record a meeting, to host a meeting. It's easy, it's fun, it gives you an opportunity to kind of improve your communication skills, and it also helps Darian do other things besides the same thing every Wednesday.
Thank you. Okay. Eric G, you are up.
Hey, so since we've been kind of talking about kind of complexity of the JupyterLab stack, I wanted to kind of get your guys' ideas on having sort of like a like a complexity management process. So like the way I would imagine this would work is we can look at something that we think kind of needs to be managed. So we could say like, hey, the build system is under complexity management. So what we would do then is try to get together, document how the system works, and then when we put something under complexity management, if people want to make changes to it, then they would need to go through a process instead of just pushing commits and then changing things. And the idea being there that there are costs for the community for those kinds of changes, right? So people can still make changes, but in this case, because let's say the build system is complexity managed, if someone wants to make a change, they simply go through this process, which ensures that we can document this stuff so that other people can understand how it works. And I think, would this naturally like leads into efforts to improve developer experience and to possibly reduce complexity too.
Andrew, were you about to say something insightful, or was that?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I haven't muted myself. No, I was looking at the server code and found really funny things there. Yeah, sorry about that.
Any other thoughts? Anybody?
Oh, but if I started to speak, I think that's a good idea. We have a lot of complex stuff, and especially when you're starting, it's hard to figure everything out. I think it would help with onboarding and like user experience of new developers.
So how do you imagine that it would work? Because like currently my impression is that there are some people who are working on fixing bugs as they appear in the build system or elsewhere. And these changes are basically reviewed in pull request reviews. Would you imagine that bug fixes are covered and maintenance is covered by that, or only new additions? Like, where do you make the distinction?
Yeah, that's a good question actually. I think it's tough to make a concrete decision because I can imagine that there will be some fixes that involve changing the way that the build system works. I think, yeah, as you say, like maybe we need to for cases like this for bug fixes, right? I mean, you can maybe the answer is to just have like a summary acceptance thing where if someone's proposing a change and this is a bug fix, we expedite it kind of with the understanding that it's not going to substantially change things for people who have to use the build system, right?
And a second question, is it the build system only, or is it packaging? These two things appear like very closely intertwined for me.
That was just an example from me. That's another good question. I just, I mean, I'm sure we can come up with other examples, right? But I picked the build system because it is pretty complex. But yeah, I possibly building the build system and or packaging. Those would be good candidates for sure, I think. But I think you can making determinations about what needs to be managed and what does not is something we could do, as a group with consensus, sort of. And
Maybe
go ahead.
So like thinking about your proposal, the alternative to introducing a new mechanism, a new thing that people have to get familiar with as well, and kind of maybe to prevent like an explosion of working groups if that was to be governed by a working group. You didn't propose that, but just saying, maybe a right way would be to go for a Jupyter enhancement proposal and try to clarify what kind of tools that we are using and that this is enshrined as the status quo, and we are trying to improve that. And if there is an improvement, it requires a new chap. That may be too high a barrier, but maybe that would be easier than having a new dedicated process.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I was just wondering, is this something that's just sort of a known thing that I haven't seen before, like complexity managed? Is this like a thing
That's
that
a new
other
idea.
projects do?
This is a new proposal from me, basically.
Okay.
Along the, yeah, also who would do this, Mike said. So what I was hoping to do, I mean, I'm hoping that there are ways to automate it sort of. So sort of by like having checks that diff a certain part of the code base to check for changes. Could be like that could be a way of checking whether changes have been made.
You know that we are just introducing a new check on CI, increasing the complexity.
Indeed.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
That we are trying to solve with. And I don't know, I feel like a single sentence maybe in bold at the top of our design principles, and someone who actively helps with review of existing pull requests and is given some kind of, wouldn't call that authority, but this idea, if was voted on by the council members, that we will try to reduce complexity of our tooling. That would probably do more towards the goal than introducing new tools to, you know, avoid complexity.
Yeah. Can you put a note about that in the meeting notes? And yeah, indeed. Yeah. Who does the work? It's another difficult question. Indeed, I think, as you said, maybe a JEP is the right way to go.
I mean, but a JEP would still not answer the question. Like a lot of times, the way things end up happening is people do them and then we write the JEP, not the other way. Like people do either proofs of concept or something that delivers some change, and then they're like, okay, let's make this, like, let's codify this. So it's really, yeah, if we can basically create a permission structure for people who work on these things to also work on the second order of them, not just build a feature or fix a bug, but also like make a process so that everyone's 6% faster next week. I think the way of doing that is just filing them as technical issues and tying them to milestones and all the same things that we do otherwise. And then when somebody's working on JupyterLab 4.1, one of the things that we put on the 4.1 milestone is let 4.1 be the version where when you're I mean, I'm picking the one that I really dislike. When your regression test fails, like there's a page you click on and you see the diff right away and you understand. Again, like that one, I understand that's the way it is.
You said you see the what? You click on what?
You click some link right there in your PR, and that link takes you to a static web page. There you see the diff with the slider instead of you have to go find the assets for the job run. And once you find those assets, you download that zip file, you run it locally, and you find the place, right? Like that one is a particularly annoying problem to solve. That's why it's like annoying as a user. But like you could imagine saying, okay, we're putting that on a list of issues for 4.1, and someone who is just working on 4.1 targets that. But not everything's like this. Like the places where you're talking about creating anywhere where prose is needed, that's a little bit harder, right?
And I think, again, I think the docs working group can hook into this process. I think, I think one of the key steps indeed of like starting a complexity management for a given area is sitting down with experts to determine how it works, document that as a starting point. I definitely like the idea of just using milestones and tying that to the releases.
Okay, this is the second time Nick has posted this a version of this. I don't know what this means. This doesn't like I think
All right. So you're running GitHub Actions.
uh-huh.
Your big old contraption generates some Rube Goldberg junk in whatever format it is, like something you got to be running a web server to open up or whatever. If you can boil that down into Markdown, you can surface that without any extra creds by writing to this magic file, and that will show up in the PR summary. So, or it'll show up on the workflow summary for that specific workflow. So your regression test fails, you pop over into there, and you base 64 encode those two images. Don't even bother with the stupid video because that sucks. And you just show the two. Maybe you use that calculated thing. You're not going to get the pretty onion skin, or maybe GitLab will let you do, or GitHub will let you do that. I don't know. But that is a way that you can surface stuff without adding a lot of complexity. It is writing files to a well-known place, and you will get stuff.
So to clarify, it doesn't show up like where all the comments are, but when you go into the job that failed, you will see that at the very bottom of the page. And I linked to a pull request which implements that for benchmarks, but without the base encoding of images. But it is also possible to post a comment using a simple script, which we already kind of used to get like, we do get like notification that snapshots were updated. So there is lots of kind of DevOps that someone could do, and we know how to solve these problems. I think the problem is not lack of know-how and lack of ideas. It's rather that the resources are not necessarily dedicated to tackle all of these issues when there are fires elsewhere.
So I guess I'll just finish by asking, I guess, what do we think a good way to codify and record this whole process, this whole idea? Should I go to a JEP for that and then move forward from there? Or what do you guys think? Or should I just write a document somewhere in the docs that says this is what we do, we should do this, and then start doing milestones?
Is there a project or an extension that you think would be right for this process that would be a good example of what it might look like? Like a lot of times it's like, it seems like in Jupyter, it's demo first, then JEPs, then scale it out a little bit. And I'm curious about like, what's the project that like complexity, you got to put in a bucket and boil that bucket. What's the one bucket that would illustrate this approach or effect to us the best, do you think?
I immediately go to the build system. That's my go-to example. So maybe that's it, essentially.
So maybe a part of the build system or something. You know, because there's a lot of actions and stuff there, but something's got to get boiled down because like there is a lot of complexity. It's like, what does this look like in practice, in action.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have this challenge over in accessibility with building this complexity because we need to test stuff across JupyterLab, across extensions, across Lumino, all these different kinds of builds now. And I'm wondering if there's some projects that might be entropy sinks rather than entropy sources that could provide some of these measurements too. And accessibility would do that, but we don't want to like put that testing into the build chain just yet because it's challenging.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'll work up. I can try to work on a prototype of this essentially. I can try to work that up.
Cool. Go ahead, Mike.
So possibly another solution would be having a pull request review checklist, and we already kind of do that and try to flag when a new dependency is being added. But it seems ultimately related to basically reviewing new code to limit the complexity. And we do have some section in the documentation describing when a pull request should be merged, and it encourages every member of council to merge pull requests and everyone to review. Of course, the parts that they feel comfortable reviewing, and maybe working on a checklist for a review, suggest a checklist based on what files were modified, like does it touch the build system, does it touch CSS files? Maybe that could help, or maybe just updating the docs could help.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Let us move on. Thank you. Okay. Mohammed, you're up.
Thank you. Should I wait for to be the last one, or I can start right now?
No, I think it's okay. We have, 26 minutes left. So I think if yours is 10 minutes, we'll have plenty of time.
That's perfect. Yeah. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk here. Today I'm gonna present very briefly a side project that they have called Libro-based apps, which are Jupyter-centric native apps for interactive computing. So I'm Mohammad Pishahang. I've spent quite a few years in academia, but currently I'm a PhD student at UCLA. And hopefully next year I will be graduated. So when we work on multidisciplinary projects, we usually develop very sophisticated libraries, but in many cases, such as the research that I do, my PhD, the end users are not programmers. Mostly they're field engineers, managers, or decision makers, like people who have no idea what is programming. So we need to develop some app to make the product easier for them to understand and to use. But always we have problems because as small teams, we have limited human resources and financial resources. So if you want to develop web applications, we need to develop front end and back end, like two separate code bases. In many cases, for data driven applications, we need a lot of computational power on the server. So we need to pay for that, or a lot of DevOps. So it's impossible almost for small teams like ours to develop very reliable web applications. And when it comes to native applications, it's just too complex because we need people fluent in different programming languages for different operating systems. That's why I'm working on Libro-based. Libro-based is nothing else but a Jupyter server, basically, which is bundled or packaged with Tori into native applications for Windows, macOS, and Linux. The bundle also includes a very tiny micromamba executable file to handle conda environments. And finally, the front end part can be implemented in JavaScript using any framework, Svelte, Vue, Vite, React, or anything. So the general workflow is that like the small team focuses only on the JavaScript part, and then they use Libra-based APIs to do anything beyond the browser. So it could be managing an embedded conda environment, or running a Jupyter server, or communicating with that Jupyter server using JupyterLab services package. So I will present two small applications that I created. The first one is a JupyterLab desktop, and the second one is like a template Svelte kit application I developed, just to show how the final application would be. So here I have a JupyterLab desktop, and you see that I bundled them into native applications using Tari. And here I have an executable file. It's a quite small file, like 23 megabytes. And remember, like even 11 megabytes is the micro Mamba executable. So when we run it in the first run, it creates an environment inside the content of that package. Then it installs the requirements. It's basically a pip install everything. And then it runs a Jupyter server, in this case, a JupyterLab. And then we will have like a complete JupyterLab running as a native applications. So we can run codes, and we will have access to the Python of that embedded environment like this. So we can install new libraries with pip inside that environment. So and it's cool because we can bundle like prepared notebooks, and also like we can interact with the application as it is. Now, the interesting thing is that in the second run, it doesn't spend that much time in creating that environment. It just checks the environment and makes sure that all requirements are already installed, and then it runs a little bit faster. So the second application is a very small application that I developed just to show that we are not limited to run JupyterLab. So we have JupyterLab services API, so we can create basically any front end that we want. So in this case, instead of running JupyterLab, we are running a Jupyter server with a custom port and with a custom token that we dynamically generate inside the app. And then here, we have just a very small code that runs like a native app, but actually behind the scene, it's nothing but a Jupyter server. And also, it's very interesting because thanks to Tari, we can install these apps like really native apps, and then we will have access to those applications here inside our system. So I will go back to my presentation. And we are not limited to very like simplistic applications. I'm working on related projects since 2018. And during this time, we developed, I believe, that quite sophisticated applications based on Jupyter technology. So for example, we developed an application which includes a GIS-based environment for wildfire-safe evacuation of people in small cities. Or we developed another application which helps the users to develop a data flow visually, and then the app generates the Python code, which would be for pre-processing pandas or scikit-learn or TensorFlow, and then they run their application without coding and just like in a visual environment. our previous implementation was not like a native app. We developed a web application, and then we required the user to open a terminal and run a Jupyter server, and then give the application the port to to connect to that server. I know it's not safe, but the idea of these applications was that we developed something for a very specific client, so they just trusted us. Or we developed some applications to be used in the classroom, so the people could trust us. But the native apps solves this problem because it dynamically generates the token and everything. So we get many benefits from developing native apps like this. Thanks to Tori, it will be used on macOS, Windows, and Linux. The apps are very lightweight. It's self-contained. Thanks to Micromamba, we don't need the user to have Python or Conda installed. It includes everything and runs independently. And it's extremely fast to develop. So imagine the research team develops a Jupyter notebook, and then for each code block, we just need to develop a very small custom front end. So basically, in that app, the code block that they had was a block like this. And dynamically in the front end, we update this code, and then using the Jupyter Lab services package, we just communicate with the server and receive the results. And also we can develop multi-language. We can implement our logic in multiple languages. If I have some Python package or R package that does a part of my business better, I can run several Jupyter kernels and then communicate with them and mix the result in the front end. We have stateful Jupyter processes, so it's perfect for interactive computing. And at the same time, we have isolated Jupyter sessions. So we can have several sessions, one for the computational part, one for project management, and so on and so forth. And I think this is the last slide, which talks about the challenges. I think we can use Rattler, which seems quite interesting repository from prefix.dev people. If you can use that, the bundle size would be much smaller, but still the app is independent of Python or Conda. And also the main challenge is that we install a Jupyter server on the client's computer, and it has a lot of access to the file system, to shell and everything. So it makes the app not very safe. So I'm trying to find a solution to run that Jupyter server in a container, so we can, like in a safer way, run Libro-based applications on our site. I try to keep the presentation very short, but thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for presenting.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, I see one in the chat where Mike says, thanks, that's super cool. Tori, sounds like it could be a great thing for JupyterLab Desktop Lite, given how light it is. Something good enough for many users, though the native OS web renderer has its limitations, environment management aside. And this actually echoes sort of, I've been curious too, like I don't know about the difference between Tori and Electron, basically, right? And JupyterLab Desktop, the official release of JupyterLab is on Electron, but I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Actually, Electron, the difference is that Electron ships a complete Node.js runtime and also a complete Chromium browser. So basically the final bundle would be a couple of hundreds of megabytes, I think. But Tori uses the native web view of the operating system, and also the backend is in Rust, so the final bundle size is much smaller. And I think it uses a lot less RAM when the application runs. JupyterLite is really cool. I follow JupyterLite. Like I try to use it, and it's really cool. But the problem I had with JupyterLite was that I use several libraries like Eclipse Sumo for traffic simulation, and those libraries are not still translated into WebAssembly. And I'm not that expert to do it myself. So I had to run everything locally on my computer to make sure that I can use all my libraries.
Yeah, that'll be improving soon. Hi, this is Nick. I'm one of the JupyterLite developers. So right now we've got the 2 Python kernels, the Zeus and the Pyodide one. They're going to be binary compatible soon. So, and then the other piece is both Pyodide and mScriptInForge are trying to break out of the mono repo so that they're standalone individual recipes like KindaForge works. So that's great. No, that's a great piece of kit. I would just put out there that it's cute to have a fast upfront download, but then if it goes and talks to the internet and you're like, oh, it's going to go talk to the internet now. Is that okay? Like Chrome gets away with that and stuff like that, right? And the other like big boy installer stuff, but it really makes reproducibility a lot harder, and it makes it harder to reason about the tool. So like you go to a conference, this would be great to hand out to everybody in a workshop because I don't have to do anything, but then bam, it just eats all your conference Wi-Fi when everybody's downloading NumPy again. So I think in your build chain, I would certainly consider making it an option to include those pre-built environments. Because a single upfront download is way more, that you use the community resources to build your environments in the first place, and then you use whatever your CDN is to download it. It's not like, here's this DDoS in a box for anaconda.org. If 1,000 people download it because it hits Hacker News or something like that. So that's the trade-off on those things, I guess. But very nice kit, very nice kit. How do you test things?
Thank you. First, that's a completely valid comment. It's true. For testing these, I'm actually not a professional programmer. I'm a self-tutored programmer. So I try to test them on several computers, but not like in a systematic way. I need to learn more.
All right. In the interest of getting through the agenda, though, I think we need to stop the conversation here for now. But thank you again for presenting, and that was awesome. And please maybe leave on the agenda a link that people could follow to learn more, because we post these minutes in our Team Compass. Okay, Rosio, you are up.
Hi, I just had 2 questions. My first one is listed. So I found myself this last week running into an issue where I was in a broken state for JupyterLab, and I tried running the cleaning script and deleting as many files as I could see, but I could not come back from it. And ultimately, I'm not sure I know what worked for me, but I found a few issues in the JupyterLab repository that have been opened somewhat recently, and they're facing the same issue that I found myself in. and that was kind of a yarn issue with React not being found for some of the dependencies. And I'm wondering if anyone on this call has found themselves in this sort of situation, and if so, if there's some like tried and true way that they know to get out of it. I saw some comments on one of the issues, but for this, yeah, I try to do my best to just kind of like figure out what if any files I had seen left over, but I just couldn't get a working state until very many environments later. Yeah, I think Mike,
Yep.
you can go ahead.
From a very quick look at the 3 issues that you linked, they indeed have this shared warning about React in the logs. But from my understanding, this is a warning which is not related to the underlying issue, because when I look in detail at the reports, the error in each of these issues is very different, and it's just that Yarn produces this warning along many other warnings. So that likely was not the issue that you had at hand. And what I would very warmly encourage is to immediately copy and paste the traceback of your error and maybe send it in the Gitter channel or open an issue on GitHub, because then we can kind of compare that in full and filter out warnings. It would be great if we could address all the warnings that Yarn produces, but some of them are just pure noise. And I know that some of the folks on the call had already tried to minimize them or filter them out. So it's, yeah, it's a problem with tooling, but the tooling is trying to tell something useful, but it confuses the end user or the end developer.
I'm wondering, actually, do all of these issues have the same traceback where they're saying prepare metadata for build editable is failing?
Oh yeah, that's very annoying as well.
That happens to me all the time, and I
Yes.
never know what causes it, and it's
But
super confusing. And
so this is a problem from the PyProject hooks, which is completely unrelated to any Jupyter stuff and any front end, etc. It's just that there is this very bad handling of error messages in a project which is maintained by the Python Packaging Authority. And from what I understand, there already was a pull request or issue to fix that, but maybe we are not pulling the right version. Maybe there is something else going on. I will try to link that in the chat because I was looking at this yesterday.
Thanks, Mike. That's a good point. I think I have saved the traceback for my error somewhere, so I'm gonna try to share it in the Gitter channel if I find it. Because yeah, if I looked into it and I saw I focused on the wrong thing, that's I can pull it up. So I guess oh, my other point is not. I think I deleted on accident, but I had another bullet I can. And that is a question about I have a CSS file that I'm seeing it, I'm adding it into the JupyterLab like static assets, and I see that there's like the builder and the Webpack plugin that helps with copying the assets to the static directory. And I have no issue when I'm running in development mode, but after building and running JupyterLab, outside of development mode, I am not seeing or I get 404 errors. So I'm wondering if I'm placing this file in the wrong spot, and if anyone can give me guidance as to where where I should place this file so that it gets accurately copied over with all the other static assets.
Can anyone answer is if you put a file in the static folder in the lab repo, I think the build and file inclusion rules should pick it up. Is that right? When someone does a pip install.
So that's part of the manifest. That's a question.
Yeah, I think that should be the case, right? I think now.
I am not 100% sure. Does anyone who knows about the package, the JupyterLab Python package, know the answer? Okay, so if you're in the root of the repo, where is static?
In the root of the repo, you go into the JupyterLab folder, and then you have a static folder generated with these static assets.
I
I'm
don't
not
think.
seeing that in the GitHub repo. Is this something that's created when you run build?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, somebody could download from PyPI the JupyterLab tarball and just open it up and check if it has a static folder in it, right?
So I'm looking at my local repo and I'm not seeing a static folder under JupyterLab, like the
Yeah.
subdirectory of JupyterLab under the root.
Right, it's not there, but in the tarball, it is there.
Huh.
So in the tarball, static is filled with a whole bunch of built assets. I think that means if you put an asset in there too, when you package it, it'll ship, but you can't just like check it in Git, right? Because this is part of a build process. Because as Jason's pointing out, it's not in the Git repo, but as I'm seeing when I went to PyPI and downloaded the tarball, it is in the tarball.
The tarball is different from the wheel, right? The tarball is an S-dist, which is different from the thing that most people install.
Yeah, that's true. That was just my quick proxy for checking if that thing gets shipped. But you're right.
Yeah, but it might be shipped into the share folder and not the Python package folder.
Okay, I see.
That's what I would expect. At least that's where those static folders typically have gone in the past.
Yeah.
So actually, because we're about to run out of time, I think I should probably stop recording. We can continue the conversation, but yeah. So brace yourselves. I mean, bye everyone. Now brace yourselves.